The great chamber of the Galactic Council buzzed with nervous energy. Representatives from 847 different worlds filled the massive space. Some floated in special atmosphere bubbles, others sat on heated rock slabs. A few hung from the ceiling in web-like structures. But today, all eyes focused on the small figure standing at the central podium. Ambassador Zephyr 9 looked nothing like the humans everyone was talking about. The Altarian stood barely 4 feet tall, with blue-green skin that shimmered under the chamber's lights. Multiple arms gestured as he spoke, his voice carrying across the vast space through translation devices. "Honored Council," Zephyr 9 began, "I call for an emergency vote on Motion 7749. We must issue a formal warning about the species, called humans." A ripple of sound moved through the chamber. Some representatives clicked mandibles in annoyance. Others released chemical signals of confusion. The motion was unprecedented. In 10,000 years of Council history, no one had ever called for a warning about a single species. Council Speaker Mordax, an ancient being that looked like a tree made of crystals, chimed softly. "Ambassador Zephyr 9, please state your reasons. Humans have been council members for only 50 standard years. They seem harmless enough." "Harmless?" Zephyr 9's skin flashed bright orange, a sign of distress among his people. "Honored Speaker, that is exactly the problem. They appear harmless until you involve them in your conflicts." In the third tier of seats, War Prime Thax of the Krillian Empire shifted his massive bulk. The reptilian warrior stood 9 feet tall, covered in natural armor that had turned black with age and countless battles. His species had conquered 12 star systems in the past century. The idea that small, soft humans could pose any threat seemed ridiculous. "This is foolish," Thax rumbled, his voice like grinding stone. "The Krillian Empire has studied these humans. They are weak. No natural weapons, thin skin, slow healing. We could crush 1,000 of them without effort." Zephyr 9 turned toward the Krillian section. That is what the Vorthan Collective thought. They hired human mercenaries to help fight rebels on their outer colonies. The humans won the war in 3 months, but they did not just defeat the rebels. They convinced the Collective to free all their slave species and restructure their entire government. "Impossible," clicked Captain Nexus of the Hegemony Fleet. Her insect-like form twitched with disbelief. "No mercenary force can change a government from the inside." The Council Archivist, a floating sphere of pure energy, pulsed with soft light. Data streams flowed from its form, creating holographic displays above the chamber. "The ambassador speaks truth," the archivist intoned. "Records show 23 conflicts involving human military contractors in the past 10 years. The displays showed star maps, battle reports, and outcome summaries. Each conflict told the same strange story. Humans would be hired by one side, usually as minor support troops. The wars would end quickly and decisively, but the results never matched what anyone expected. The Meridian Corporate War, the archivist continued. Humans hired by Meridian Corp to protect mining stations. Result: war ended with both sides forming a joint environmental protection agency. More data flowed. The Kepler Rebellion, humans hired by colonial government to suppress uprising. Result: colonial government dissolved. New Democratic Federation formed with rebel leaders as elected officials. The trade route conflict. Humans hired by the Centauri Syndicate to clear pirate fleets. Result: pirates reformed into legitimate security companies, now protecting the same trade routes they once raided. Number 2. War Prime Thax slammed a clawed fist against his seat. "These reports make no sense. Wars are won through superior firepower and tactical skill. How can soft mammals achieve such results?" Ambassador Zephyr 9's skin turned deep purple, the color of painful memory among his people. "Because they do not fight the same war you think you are fighting." War Prime. The chamber fell silent. Even the constant hum of life support systems seemed to quiet as Zephyr 9 continued. 5 years ago, my home world of Altair 7 was attacked by the Crimson Fleet, 50,000 pirates in advanced warships. Our planetary defense force was outnumbered 10 to 1. We hired human military advisors, only 200 soldiers led by a human colonel named Martinez. Zephyr 9 paused, his multiple arms trembling slightly. We expected the humans to help us fight ship-to-ship battles. Instead, Colonel Martinez spent the first week interviewing every citizen on our world. He asked about our history, our culture, our fears. We thought he was wasting precious time. The holographic displays shifted, showing images of Altair 7. A world of floating cities connected by gleaming bridges above purple seas. When the Crimson Fleet arrived, the humans did something none of us understood. They broadcast across all channels. Not threats or demands, but stories. Stories about Altarian art, music, literature. They showed the galaxy what would be lost if our world was destroyed. Council Speaker Mordax chimed with interest. And this stopped the pirates? Not immediately, Zephyr 9 admitted. But within hours, donations began flooding in from across the galaxy. Art collectors, museum curators, university professors, all offering to pay for the protection of Altarian culture. The humans had turned our military crisis into a galactic cultural preservation effort. The archivist's displays showed financial records, millions of credits transferred in mere days. Meanwhile, Zephyr 9 continued, the humans were doing something else. They were talking to the Crimson Fleet, not negotiating, interviewing. They spoke with captured pirates, studied their backgrounds, learned why they turned to raiding. War Prime Thax snorted, foolish sentiment. Pirates choose evil because they are evil. That is what we thought, Zephyr 9 replied. But the humans discovered that 60% of the Crimson Fleet were refugees from worlds destroyed by corporate mining operations. They had families hidden in asteroid bases, living in poverty. The humans offered them something better, legitimate work helping to relocate and protect other refugee populations. The chamber buzzed with confused chatter. Representatives struggled to understand how this could work. By the time the Crimson Fleet reached our world, Zephyr 9 concluded, half their ships had already switched sides. The rest found themselves facing not just our defense force, but volunteer fleets from 12 different systems. The war ended with the Crimson Fleet leadership accepting amnesty in exchange for helping establish a refugee resettlement program. Council Speaker Mordax's crystal form sparkled with amazement. Most unusual. But surely this was a special case. The archivist pulsed again. Negative, honored speaker. Pattern analysis shows consistency across all human military interventions. They do not simply apply force to achieve victory. They identify and resolve the underlying causes of conflict. War Prime Thax rose from his seat, armor plates grinding. This changes nothing. The Krillian Empire fears no soft-skinned humans. Our military might has conquered a dozen worlds. No amount of talking and cultural appreciation can stand against true warrior strength. Ambassador Zephyr 9 looked directly at the massive Krillian. His skin flashed bright red, the color of urgent warning. That, War Prime Thax, is exactly what we are trying to warn you about. 6 months after the Galactic Council warning, War Prime Thax stood on the command deck of his flagship, the Iron Fang. Through the massive viewport, he could see the mining world of Kepler 442b spinning slowly in space. What should have been a simple operation to crush some rebels had turned into an embarrassing stalemate. The Krillian Empire had ruled this world for 20 years. The local species, called Velkans, had provided cheap labor for the massive mining operations that stripped precious metals from their planet. Everything had been peaceful until 6 months ago, when the locals started refusing to work. At first, it seemed like a small problem. The Velkans were a peaceful people, short, covered in soft fur, with large eyes that made them look permanently worried. They had no advanced weapons, no military training, and no starships. Thax had expected to crush their rebellion in a few days, but somehow, the rebels kept avoiding his forces. They knew every cave and tunnel on their world. Krillian troops would march into rebel strongholds, only to find them empty. The Velkans would appear somewhere else, sabotaging mining equipment before vanishing again. After 3 months of frustration, Thax had made his decision. The Galactic Council's warning about humans meant nothing to him. His species had never lost a war in 10,000 years. If the humans were such great warriors, he would hire them to finish this rebellion quickly. The human transport ship looked pathetic next to Thox's war fleet. Where Krillian vessels were massive and covered in weapons, the human ship was small and plain. It looked more like a cargo hauler than a military transport. Thox had expected the humans to send thousands of soldiers. Instead, only 200 humans emerged from their ship. They carried simple weapons and basic equipment. No powered armor, no energy shields, no heavy artillery. Thox began to wonder if hiring them had been a waste of money. The human leader was a small female named Colonel Sarah Chen. She stood barely 5 feet tall, with dark hair and calm brown eyes. When she met Thox in his command center, she had to crane her neck to look up at him. "War Prime," she said in accented but clear Galactic standard. "Thank you for hiring our services. We're here to help resolve your situation." Thox gestured dismissively with one massive claw. "There is nothing to resolve, human. These Velkan rebels must be crushed completely. I want them broken so thoroughly that no other world will dare rebel against Krillian rule." Colonel Chen nodded slowly. "I understand your position. Before we begin operations, my team will need a few days to assess the situation. We'll need access to all your intelligence files on the Velkans." "Intelligence files?" Thax rumbled with amusement. "They are primitive miners. What intelligence do you need? Point your weapons at them and fire." "Of course," Chen replied. "But first, we should understand who we're fighting and why they're fighting. It helps us choose the most effective tactics." Thax found this attitude strange, but he agreed. The humans had been hired to fight, so eventually, they would fight. Let them waste a few days reading files, if it made them happy. Colonel Chen and her team spent the next week reviewing everything the Krillians had recorded about the Velkans. They studied geological surveys, mining reports, population records, and cultural observations. What they found painted a very different picture than what Thox had described. The Velkans had not simply decided to rebel 6 months ago. The mining operations had slowly been destroying their planet. Sacred burial grounds had been dug up for metals. Chemical runoff from processing plants was poisoning their water supply. Ancient forests that held religious significance were being clear-cut to build more facilities. The human medic, Dr. James Park, spent hours reviewing health records from Velkan settlements. He discovered that birth defects among Velkan children had increased by 400% in the past 5 years. Respiratory diseases were spreading through their communities. The mining operations were slowly killing the entire population. Meanwhile, other humans were interviewing captured Velkan rebels. Thox had expected them to extract military intelligence, locations of hidden bases, names of leaders, plans for future attacks. Instead, the humans asked about Velkan history, culture, and beliefs. They learned that the Velkans had a complex society based on harmony with their natural environment. Their entire religion centered around the idea that their planet was a living entity that must be protected. The mining operations weren't just destroying their homes, they were destroying everything their civilization valued. One captured rebel, a young Velkan named Jorix, spent 3 hours explaining to Dr. Park how the mining chemicals had killed the sacred grove where his ancestors were buried. Tears ran down his furry face as he described watching 1,000-year-old trees wither and die. Instead of interrogating Jorix about rebel plans, Dr. Park asked him to draw pictures of how the grove had looked before the mining began. He carefully recorded Jorix's stories about the religious ceremonies that had been performed there. When Thox learned about these interviews, he was furious. "Why are you wasting time on their primitive beliefs? I hired you to fight, not to listen to sob stories." Colonel Chen met his anger with calm professionalism. "War Prime. We're gathering intelligence. Understanding our enemies' motivations helps us predict their actions and exploit their weaknesses. Their weakness is that they are weak." Thox slammed his fist on the command table. "They have no weapons that can harm Krillian armor. A direct assault will scatter them like leaves." "Perhaps," Chen agreed. "But consider this. You've been trying direct assaults for 6 months. The rebellion has only grown stronger. Maybe it's time to try a different approach. Thax was beginning to regret hiring these humans. They seemed more interested in talking than fighting, but he had already paid their fee, and he was curious to see what they would do when they finally stopped studying and started shooting. What he didn't know was that Colonel Chen's team had already begun their real work. While some humans interviewed prisoners and studied files, others were quietly making contact with Velkan communities that hadn't yet joined the rebellion. Dr. Park and 2 other humans had disguised themselves as independent medical researchers. They approached Velkan settlements under the pretense of studying local diseases. Instead of demanding information, they offered free medical treatment for children suffering from mining-related illnesses. The Velkans were suspicious at first. Humans were allies of the Krillians, after all. But when Dr. Park successfully treated a young Velkan girl who had been dying from chemical poisoning, word spread quickly through the underground networks. Other humans presented themselves as engineers concerned about environmental damage. They studied the mining operations and quietly developed plans for cleaning up the contaminated water supplies. They shared these plans with Velkan scientists, claiming it was for an academic research project. Colonel Chen herself requested permission to visit active mining sites, claiming she needed to understand the terrain where battles might take place. What she actually did was document every safety violation and environmental crime she observed. Within a week, the humans had more intelligence about the rebellion than the Krillians had gathered in 6 months. But more importantly, they had begun building relationships with the local population. When Thax finally demanded that the humans begin military operations, Colonel Chen agreed, but her plan was unlike anything the Krillians expected. "We recommend a hearts and minds campaign," she explained during a strategy meeting. "Instead of attacking rebel strongholds directly, we should focus on winning over the civilian population that supports them." Thax stared at her in disbelief. "Hearts and minds? What does that mean?" We provide aid and assistance to Velkan communities. We show them that cooperation brings benefits, while rebellion brings only suffering. Eventually, they'll turn against the rebels themselves. "That could take months," Thax protested. "I want this rebellion crushed now." Colonel Chen nodded, understanding. "I know it seems slow, War Prime, but this approach creates lasting peace. When we're finished, the Velkans won't rebel again because they'll have no reason to rebel." Thax was growing more frustrated by the day. These humans seemed to have no understanding of how wars were supposed to work. You killed your enemies until they surrendered. It was simple and effective, but he had hired them, and he was curious to see if their strange methods would work at all. Against his better judgment, he agreed to let them try their hearts and minds campaign. He had no idea that Colonel Chen's real plan was already in motion. The humans weren't trying to win the war for the Krillians. They were trying to solve the problem that had caused the war in the first place, and that was going to change everything. 2 weeks into the human hearts and minds campaign, Field Commander Vexus was ready to bite through his own armor in frustration. The Krillian officer had served under War Prime Thax for 15 years and had never seen anything like what the humans were doing. Instead of hunting rebels, the humans had split their forces across the planet. Small teams embedded themselves in Velkan communities, claiming to provide security and aid. But they weren't securing anything. They were building schools. Vexus watched through his tactical display as Dr. James Park worked alongside Velkan engineers to construct a water filtration system in the village of Kalara. The humans had brought medical supplies, construction equipment, and educational materials. They were teaching Velkan children to read Galactic Standard while their parents learned about water purification techniques. "This is not war," Vexus complained to Colonel Chen during their daily briefing. "My warriors are trained killers, not construction workers." Colonel Chen looked up from a tablet displaying population health statistics. "Field Commander, with respect, your warriors have been trying to kill these rebels for 6 months without success. Perhaps it's time to try building something instead of destroying it." "Building what? Schools for our enemies?" "Building trust," Chen replied simply. "Right now, every Velkan on this planet sees the Krillian Empire as invaders who destroy their world. We're changing that perception. But Vexus could see that wasn't entirely true. The humans weren't just helping Velkans. They were documenting everything. Every conversation was recorded. Every mining site was photographed. Every health problem was cataloged and studied. Dr. Park had compiled extensive medical records showing the effects of mining pollution on Velkan children. Human engineers had produced detailed reports about environmental damage. Colonel Chen's intelligence teams had interviewed hundreds of Velkans about their experiences under Krillian rule. What confused Vexus most was that the humans shared all this information with the Velkans themselves. Instead of keeping intelligence secret, they were teaching Velkan scientists how to conduct their own environmental studies. They were training Velkan medics to treat mining-related diseases. In the rebel stronghold hidden beneath Mount Kalar, Resistance leader Jorix studied the data the humans had provided. His large, worried eyes moved across charts, showing pollution levels in 17 different water sources. The evidence was overwhelming. The mining operations were slowly poisoning his entire species. But the humans had given him more than just data. They had given him something he had never expected: military training. Sergeant Mike Rodriguez, a quiet human with scars on his hands, had spent a week teaching Jorix's fighters about asymmetric warfare. Not how to attack Krillian forces directly, but how to strike at their supply lines, communication networks, and morale. Never fight their strength, Rodriguez explained to a group of young Velkans gathered around a map of mining operations. The Krillians have better weapons and armor, but they depend on complex logistics to maintain their operations, disable their transport vehicles, jam their communications, make them feel isolated and afraid. Jorix found these lessons fascinating. The Krillians fought like predators, direct, brutal, overwhelming. But the humans fought like something else entirely. They studied their enemies, learned their weaknesses, then applied pressure in unexpected ways. "But why are you helping us?" Jorix asked during a quiet moment. "You work for the Krillians." Rodriguez was cleaning his rifle, a simple projectile weapon that looked primitive compared to Krillian energy cannons. "We work for whoever pays us," he said. "But that doesn't mean we don't care about what's right." "And what is right?" Rodriguez looked up from his weapon. "Nobody should have to watch their children die from poisoned water just so some corporation can make a profit." Back in the Krillian command center, War Prime Thox was growing increasingly suspicious of human activities. His spy drones reported that humans were meeting regularly with known rebels. They were teaching combat techniques to civilian Velkans. Some human teams had completely disappeared into the wilderness, claiming to be conducting environmental surveys. "Colonel Chen," Thox rumbled, during another tense briefing, "your forces are fraternizing with the enemy. This is not acceptable." Chen consulted her tablet calmly. "War Prime. My teams are gathering intelligence and building relationships with local populations. This is standard procedure for counterinsurgency operations. Standard procedure is to kill rebels, not teach them new fighting techniques. With respect, War Prime, your standard procedures have not been working. Rebel attacks have actually increased since we arrived." This was true, though Thox didn't understand why. Velkan rebels were striking mining facilities with new sophistication. Instead of random sabotage, they targeted specific equipment that caused maximum disruption, with minimal casualties. They had stopped attacking Krillian patrols directly, instead focusing on supply convoys and communication relays. What Thox didn't know was that the humans had completely reorganized the rebel strategy. Instead of trying to defeat the Krillians militarily, they were turning the rebellion into a systematic campaign of economic pressure. Human intelligence specialist Lieutenant Sarah Kim worked with Jorix to identify the most critical components of the mining operation. Instead of blowing up expensive equipment randomly, the rebels began targeting specific systems that would cost the most to replace and take the longest to repair. Meanwhile, Dr. Park and his medical team had expanded their operations to cover 12 Velkan settlements. They weren't just treating sick children. They were training local medics and establishing permanent health clinics. More importantly, they were documenting every case of pollution-related illness with scientific precision. The data they collected painted a horrifying picture. Birth defects among Vulcans had increased by 600% since mining operations began. Life expectancy had dropped by 30 years. Entire species of local animals had gone extinct from habitat destruction. But the humans weren't keeping this information secret. They were preparing to share it with the galaxy. Colonel Chen had established a communication relay hidden in the asteroid field beyond the planet. Every day, encrypted data packages were transmitted to human intelligence networks throughout known space. Environmental reports, health studies, economic analyses, and detailed documentation of Krillian mining practices were being compiled into something much larger than a military intelligence file. 3 weeks into the campaign, Jorix made a discovery that changed everything. While exploring caves beneath Mount Kalar with Sergeant Rodriguez, they found ancient Vulcan artwork that predated the Krillian occupation by thousands of years. The cave paintings showed Vulcan civilization at its peak, vast cities built in harmony with the natural environment, advanced technology that worked with biological systems instead of against them, and a complex understanding of their planet's ecosystem that put most galactic species to shame. "Your people built this?" Rodriguez asked, studying intricate murals that covered the cave walls. "Long ago," Jorix replied sadly. "Before the Krillians came, before we forgot who we were." Rodriguez began photographing the artwork with military precision. "Jorix, do you realize what this means? Your species didn't develop spaceflight, but you had advanced biotechnology. You understood ecological engineering. The Krillians didn't just conquer your world, they destroyed a unique civilization." For the first time since the rebellion began, Jorix felt something stronger than anger or desperation. He felt hope. The humans weren't just documenting Krillian crimes, they were rediscovering Vulcan heritage. That night, Colonel Chen reviewed the cave photographs with growing excitement. Her anthropologist team was already analyzing the artwork, translating ancient Vulcan texts that revealed sophisticated environmental science concepts. The Vulcans hadn't been primitive miners before the Krillians arrived. They had been environmental engineers. "This changes everything," Chen told her senior staff during their encrypted briefing. "We're not just dealing with exploitation of a primitive species. This is cultural genocide." The Krillians destroyed an advanced civilization and enslaved the survivors. Her intelligence officer, Major Tom Hassan, nodded grimly. "Ma'am, with this evidence, we can make a case for war crimes prosecution at the galactic level." The footage Dr. Park collected of health effects, combined with environmental damage reports, and now proof of cultural destruction. "The Krillians won't just lose this planet," Chen finished. "They'll lose their empire. But first, they had to make sure the evidence reached the right people. And that meant keeping their real mission secret from War Prime Thox for just a little longer. The humans had come to Kepler 442b as mercenaries hired to crush a rebellion. But they were about to leave as prosecutors preparing to bring down an entire civilization for crimes against the galaxy. Thax still thought he had hired them to win a war. He had no idea they were about to change the fundamental nature of galactic law. The galactic communication networks exploded with activity at exactly 0800 Standard Galactic Time on a Tuesday morning. Across 847 worlds, news feeds suddenly carried the same breaking story. Exclusive. Environmental genocide on Kepler 442b. Full documentation inside. As War Prime Thax was reviewing troop deployment reports when his communication officer burst into the command center. "Sir, we have a problem. A massive problem." "What is it?" Thax growled, not looking up from his tactical displays. "Sir, there are news reports about our operations here. They're everywhere. Every major network in the galaxy is carrying the same story." Thax's head snapped up. "What story?" The main display screen filled with images that made his blood run cold. Dr. James Park treating sick Vulcan children. Environmental surveys showing poisoned water systems. Ancient cave paintings depicting pre-conquest Vulcan civilization. Health statistics proving systematic poisoning of an entire species. But worst of all were the recorded statements from Colonel Sarah Chen, speaking directly to galactic media with the calm professionalism of a war crimes prosecutor. "For the past month, Chen's voice carried clearly through the command center speakers. Our team has documented systematic environmental destruction, cultural genocide, and crimes against civilian populations on Kepler 442b. The evidence shows that the Krillian Empire has knowingly poisoned an entire world and enslaved its people while destroying archaeological sites of immense scientific value. Thax stared in shock as the broadcast continued. Chen stood in front of the ancient cave paintings Jorix had discovered, with rebel leader Jorix himself translating the ancient texts for galactic audiences. The Velkan people possessed advanced biotechnology and environmental science centuries before most galactic species achieved spaceflight, Chen explained. The Krillian occupation didn't just exploit their planet. It destroyed irreplaceable scientific knowledge and cultural heritage. The communications officer's hands shook as he switched between news feeds. Sir, it's on every channel. Altarian Cultural Network, Centauri News Service, Independent Reporters Alliance, SA. They all have the same footage and documents. How is this possible? Thax roared. We control all communications on this planet. Not anymore, a calm voice said behind him. Thax spun around to find Colonel Chen standing in the command center entrance, flanked by 2 human soldiers. She looked completely relaxed, as if she belonged there. How did you get past security? Thax demanded. Your security systems have been compromised for 2 weeks, Chen replied matter-of-factly. My communications specialist, Lieutenant Kim, has been routing all your intelligence reports to our networks. We know about every troop movement, every supply shipment, every strategic decision you've made. On the display screens, the news coverage continued. Dr. Park was being interviewed by medical experts from 12 different species, explaining how mining chemicals had caused birth defects in Velkan children. Environmental scientists were expressing outrage at the scale of ecosystem destruction. Most damaging of all was testimony from captured Krillian soldiers. The humans had somehow convinced dozens of Thax's own troops to admit on camera that they had orders to destroy Velkan cultural sites and prevent civilians from accessing clean water. You planned this from the beginning, Thax realized. You never intended to fight for us. We intended to solve the problem, Chen corrected. The problem wasn't Velkan rebels. The problem was systematic oppression and environmental destruction. We solved it. Thax reached for his sidearm, but stopped when he noticed that every display screen in the command center was showing the same message. Krillian Military Communications Network offline. Please stand by. Your fleet is currently cut off from all external communications, Chen explained. My technical team has been working with Velkan computer specialists to develop some very interesting viruses. Right now, your empire has no idea what's happening here. But they will, she continued. When the Galactic Council's emergency session begins in 3 hours, we've provided them with complete documentation of war crimes, environmental terrorism, and cultural genocide. 17 different species have already filed formal complaints. The communication officer looked up from his console with panic in his reptilian eyes. Sir, I'm receiving reports from across Krillian space. Economic sanctions are being implemented immediately. Trade agreements are being suspended. Military cooperation treaties are being revoked. Why? Thax felt his world collapsing around him. This is impossible. No mercenary force can destroy an empire. We're not mercenaries, Chen replied quietly. We're problem solvers. And the Krillian Empire's approach to expansion was a very big problem. On Kepler 442b itself, the transformation was already complete. Velkan rebels had emerged from hiding to find Krillian troops laying down their weapons. Not because they had been defeated in battle, but because their own officers were refusing to follow orders. Field Commander Vexus sat in his command bunker, staring at news reports showing environmental damage caused by his own mining operations. For the first time in his military career, he was questioning everything he had been taught about Krillian superiority. Sir, one of his sergeants reported, the troops are asking if the news reports are true. They want to know if we really poisoned all those children. Vexus had no answer. The evidence was overwhelming and undeniable. Video footage showed sick Velkan babies in medical facilities. Scientific data proved that mining chemicals had contaminated the water supply. There was no way to deny what they had done. "Stand down all operations," Vexus ordered quietly. "No more mining. No more patrols. No more combat operations of any kind." "Sir, what about Warprime Thax's orders?" Vexus looked at images of dying Velkan children on his screen. "I will not follow orders to poison babies. Any soldier who wishes to continue these operations can find a new commander." Across the Krillian Empire, similar scenes were playing out. Military commanders were watching the same footage, reading the same reports, asking the same questions about their role in systematic oppression. Within hours, 3 entire star systems had declared independence from Krillian rule. In the caves beneath Mount Kalar, Jorix worked with human technical specialists to establish communication networks that would connect Velkan communities across their planet. For the first time in 20 years, his people could speak freely without fear of Krillian surveillance. "What happens now?" Jorix asked Sergeant Rodriguez as they watched news coverage of protests on Krillian homeworlds. "Now your people rebuild," Rodriguez replied. "The humans will help with environmental restoration and medical care. The Galactic Council will oversee the transition to independence, and the Krillians will face justice for what they've done." "And the war?" Rodriguez smiled grimly. "There never was a war, Jorix. There was oppression, exploitation, and resistance. The humans just changed the game so that truth could win instead of violence." Back in the Krillian Command Center, Warprime Thax faced the complete collapse of everything he had believed. His empire was fragmenting, his troops were refusing orders, and galactic opinion had turned completely against his species. "You have destroyed us," he said to Colonel Chen. "No," Chen replied calmly. "We exposed you. The destruction comes from your own choices. 20 years of environmental terrorism and cultural genocide. We just made sure the galaxy could see what you were really doing." "What do you want from me?" Chen consulted her tablet. "The Galactic Council is prepared to offer terms. Complete withdrawal from Kepler 442b within 30 days. Full environmental restoration, funded by Krillian resources. Reparations for Velkan medical care and cultural preservation. War crimes, trials for all officers involved in civilian targeting. And if I refuse, then 17 different species have already committed to military intervention. Unlike your approach, they'll have galactic law on their side." Thax stared at the screens showing his empire falling apart in real time. Protests on the Krillian homeworlds. Colonial governments declaring independence. Trade partners canceling contracts. Military allies withdrawing support. "How long have you been planning this?" he asked. Chen's expression softened slightly. "Since the first day we arrived and Dr. Park saw those sick children. The moment we understood what was really happening here, we knew this had to end. But the planning, the coordination, the intelligence networks. Humans are very good at adapting quickly," Chen explained. "We came here thinking we would fight a conventional counterinsurgency. When we discovered we were witnessing genocide, we changed our mission. Everything else was just logistics." Warprime Thax slowly reached for his command insignia and placed it on the table between them. For the first time in his adult life, he felt completely defeated. Not by superior firepower, but by superior morality. "The Galactic Council warned us not to involve humans in our battles," he said quietly. "They were right. You don't fight wars, you end them." Colonel Chen picked up the insignia and studied it for a moment before handing it back. "Warprime, this doesn't have to be an ending. It can be a beginning. Your people can learn to build instead of destroy. But first, you have to face what you've done here." As Thax took back his insignia, he realized that the humans had given him something he hadn't expected, a chance at redemption. Whether his species would take that chance remained to be seen. 1 year later, Ambassador Zephyr 9 stood before the Galactic Council once again. The great chamber buzzed with the same mixture of species as before, but the atmosphere was completely different. Where once there had been skeptical confusion about the human warning, now there was respectful attention. Council Speaker Mordax chimed softly as the session began. "Honored representatives, we gather today to review the implementation of the Terran Doctrine and its effects on galactic stability. The massive display screens around the chamber showed updated star maps. The former Krillian Empire had fragmented into 17 independent systems, most now governed by their former slave species. Trade routes that had once been maintained by military force were now protected by voluntary cooperation agreements. The results speak for themselves. Zephyr 9 began, his skin a calm blue-green that reflected his satisfaction. In the 12 months since the Kepler 442b incident, we have seen a 73% reduction in military conflicts throughout Council space. The Archivist's energy form pulsed with data streams. Confirmed. 17 territorial disputes resolved through negotiation. 42 trade conflicts settled by mediation. 8 colonial independence movements achieved through political pressure rather than armed rebellion. Captain Nexus of the Hegemony Fleet clicked her mandibles thoughtfully. But surely this is coincidence. The human actions on one world cannot have affected the entire galaxy. That is where you are wrong, a new voice said from the chamber floor. All attention turned to the witness stand, where War Prime Thox stood in simple civilian clothing. The massive Krillian looked smaller somehow, his natural armor dull with age and stress. The proud military leader, who had dismissed human warnings a year ago, was gone, replaced by someone who carried the weight of hard-learned lessons. Honored Council, Thax continued, I speak as one who ignored your warnings and hired human military contractors. I can tell you exactly how their actions changed everything. He gestured to the display screens, which now showed images from Kepler 442b. Clean water flowing in restored rivers. Velkan children playing in rebuilt forests. Former mining sites transformed into memorial parks honoring the dead. The humans did not simply defeat my forces, Thox explained. They revealed the true cost of our methods to the entire galaxy. When other species saw what we had done, the poisoned children, the destroyed heritage sites, the systematic oppression, they realized that similar horrors might be happening in their own territories. The chamber filled with uncomfortable shifting sounds as representatives from various military powers considered their own colonial policies. More importantly, Thox continued, they showed that conflicts could be resolved without massive destruction. The Velkan independence movement succeeded not through decades of bloody warfare, but through strategic exposure of the truth. Other oppressed populations began demanding the same approach. On the display screens, data flowed showing the ripple effects. The Proxima Collective had peacefully released 3 slave species rather than face human-style documentation of their crimes. The Vegan Confederacy had negotiated independence agreements with 4 colonial worlds before rebellions could begin. The Altarian Federation had voluntarily restructured their entire government to prevent future exploitation of member worlds. Council Speaker Mordax's crystal form sparkled with interest. Most fascinating. But surely not all conflicts can be resolved through information warfare? Colonel Sarah Chen stepped forward from the observer section. She wore simple civilian clothes now, having retired from active military service to become Earth's special envoy for conflict resolution. Honored Speaker, Chen said, information warfare is just one tool. The key is understanding that every conflict has underlying causes that can be addressed through non-military means. When we make those causes visible to everyone involved, violence becomes unnecessary. But what about purely military threats? Demanded General Korax of the Tau Ceti Defense Forces. Some species only understand force. Chen smiled calmly. General, in the past year, my team has documented the complete military capabilities, strategic weaknesses, and tactical doctrines of 43 different species, including yours. This information is freely available to all council members. When everyone knows exactly what everyone else is capable of, surprise attacks become impossible, and arms races become pointless. A ripple of shock moved through the chamber as representatives realized the implications. The humans hadn't just resolved one conflict. They had quietly gathered enough intelligence to prevent most future conflicts. This is unprecedented, General Korax stammered. You have intelligence on our military capabilities? We have intelligence on everyone's military capabilities, Chen replied matter-of-factly. Every species that has hired human contractors in the past decade has unknowingly provided us with complete strategic assessments. We know your strengths, your weaknesses, your supply lines, and your contingency plans. Dr. James Park stepped forward from the medical observer section. We also have comprehensive health and environmental data on most inhabited worlds. When species consider territorial expansion, they can now see exactly what ecological damage their military operations might cause. The chamber erupted in confused chatter as representatives tried to understand what they were hearing. Ambassador Zephyr 9 raised multiple arms for attention. Honored colleagues, this is precisely why the Terran Doctrine was necessary. Humans do not simply win conflicts. They fundamentally change how conflicts work. Council Speaker Mordax chimed for order. Let us review the formal language of the Terran Doctrine, for those who may not be familiar. The display screens showed the official treaty text that had been signed by all council members. Terran Doctrine, Article 1. Human military contractors do not fight wars in the traditional sense. They identify and resolve the underlying causes of conflict through information gathering, relationship building, and strategic exposure of truth. Article 2. Any species hiring human military services should expect their own military capabilities, strategic weaknesses, and potential war crimes to be thoroughly documented and shared with relevant galactic authorities. Article 3. Human intervention in any conflict will result in permanent changes to the political, economic, and social structures that created the conflict in the first place. Warning: humans treat every military engagement as an opportunity to study and catalog galactic military capabilities, resolve systemic injustices, and prevent future conflicts through strategic transparency. In simpler terms, Zephyr 9 explained, hiring humans to fight your battles is like hiring investigators to expose everything wrong with your society. They will solve your immediate problem, but they will also solve problems you didn't know you had. Warprime Thax nodded grimly. Which is why 17 species quietly resolved territorial disputes this year, rather than risk human scrutiny. Who wants their war crimes documented for galactic prosecutors? Captain Nexus clicked thoughtfully. So the mere possibility of human involvement prevents conflicts from escalating? Exactly, Colonel Chen confirmed. We don't need to intervene directly anymore. The threat of investigation and exposure keeps most aggressors from starting conflicts in the first place. Dr. Park consulted his medical records. We're also seeing unprecedented cooperation on environmental protection, medical research, and cultural preservation. Species that might have competed for resources are now sharing information to avoid the kind of ecological disasters we documented on Kepler 442b. Council Speaker Mordax's form sparkled with what might have been amusement. So the humans have achieved galactic peace through the threat of embarrassment? Through the threat of truth, Chen corrected gently. Most conflicts are based on misunderstandings, hidden agendas, or systemic injustices. When those are exposed to public scrutiny, the conflicts usually resolve themselves. The archivist pulsed with new data. Incoming priority message for Ambassador Zephyr 9. The Rigel Consortium has formally requested mediation assistance for territorial disputes with 3 neighboring systems. They specifically request that human observers not be involved. Zephyr 9's skin flashed with satisfied orange. Perfect. That is exactly the kind of request we hope to see. Species resolving conflicts themselves to avoid human attention. But what happens, asked a representative from the distant Perseus arm, when some species ignore the warnings and hire humans anyway? Colonel Chen exchanged glances with Warprime Thax. That happened last month. The Betelgeuse Mining Corporation hired human security consultants to deal with labor unrest on their asteroid facilities. And, prompted Council Speaker Mordax, the labor unrest turned out to be justified protests against unsafe working conditions and wage theft, Chen explained. Our team documented the violations and shared them with galactic labor rights organizations. The corporation is now paying full compensation to workers and implementing safety standards that exceed council requirements. The corporation executives, Thax added with what might have been dark satisfaction, are facing criminal charges for endangering worker safety across 17 different jurisdictions. Dr. Park smiled. Meanwhile, the former protesters are now working as safety consultants, helping other corporations avoid similar problems. Everyone benefits, except those who were breaking the law. Ambassador Zephyr 9 looked around the chamber at representatives who were clearly reconsidering their own policies and practices. This is why the warning remains in effect. Humans solve problems. Sometimes the problem is obvious. Rebels fighting against oppression. Sometimes the problem is hidden, systematic corruption, or environmental destruction. But they always find the real problem and fix it. Which brings us, Council Speaker Mordax chimed, to the final item on today's agenda. The formal request from the Vegan Confederacy for human mediation in their succession crisis. The chamber fell silent. The Vegan Confederacy controlled 12 star systems and had been stable for centuries. If they were requesting human intervention, something significant was happening, Colonel Chen sighed. The succession crisis is actually a cover story. Our preliminary investigation suggests that the Confederacy leadership has been systematically embezzling public resources for decades. They want our help managing the scandal before it destroys their government entirely. And will you help them? Asked War Prime Thox. We'll help them transition to a transparent, accountable government that serves their citizens instead of enriching corrupt officials, Chen replied. Whether their current leadership survives that transition depends on how willing they are to cooperate with investigations and make reparations. Ambassador Zephyr 9's skin shifted to a deep, satisfied purple. And this, honored colleagues, is why the Galactic Council's warning stands. Do not involve humans in your battles unless you are prepared for them to solve all your other problems as well. The Great Chamber buzzed with quiet conversations as representatives filed out, many of them undoubtedly reconsidering various policies and practices that might not survive human scrutiny. Council Speaker Mordax's final chime carried a note of dry amusement. Session adjourned. May we all continue to find creative ways to resolve our conflicts without embarrassing ourselves in front of the humans. As the representatives dispersed, Ambassador Zephyr 9 remained behind, watching the display screens show peaceful images from dozens of worlds, where conflicts had been resolved through negotiation rather than warfare. The warning had become more than just words. It had become a new way of thinking about conflict itself. And the galaxy was more peaceful because of it.